Good morning, everybody. We'll get the show started very, very soon. Just to give everybody a couple minutes to get in here. Morning, Brandon. Morning, Sandy. I don't know. I doubt it. This was more informative rather than I don't know what to call the other one. Accusational, I guess is the one. That's the way you took it. Wasn't meant to be. It's just meant to get everybody hyped up. You guys hear me okay? I'm assuming you can. Morning, Fishing for Whiskers. Thanks for joining me on this lovely Saturday. We are trying the different software today. I went back to trying StreamYard. The other one I felt was lagging way too much on the live, so we are giving StreamYard a shot today. I've had good luck with it in the past. Never doing a podcast though, so we'll see how that goes. Yeah, I'm not. I was just messing with this. I don't know. There's other options too. And it was just something to have in the background, so it wasn't 5 minutes for nothing while the timer went down. Like I said, I'm just giving people a chance to get in here. That's all this was for in the first place. Did y'all see Skipjack Cindy's flathead last night? It's a pretty nice fish. Oh, trust me, I'm the same way. I'd much rather have words in it too. But hey, timer's over. Let's get it going. That's not what I meant to do. Hey, good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Yakety Yak Fishing Podcast. Today we are going over the equipment basics for beginners. If you are new to the channel or new to the stream, welcome in. My name is Anthony. We are doing a series called Anyone Can Fish. This is episode 2. And it's just to help people that are new to the sport get into the sport, and anybody who's out of touch to get back into the basics. Nothing crazy, nothing insane. But let me just ask you a question. From the fishing perspective, from getting into fishing, what's the first thing that gets overwhelming when it comes to the sport? I mean, obviously, you find out about fishing, you see all these big fish, you're like, oh man, I want to get into that, all that good stuff. And then you're like, how do I get there? Okay, so I need to get some fishing gear. I need to get some stuff. What do I need to get? There's you have millions of options, varied price points. It could be super cheap, it could be super expensive. What the goal of today's stream is to show y'all not only just a small brief history about fishing and where it's come from and where it's going, but just how cheap it can be for somebody starting out. And at the very end, I'm also going to suggest a couple of setups for somebody who's new to try to get in for as cheap as possible, but have the most fun possible, catching the most amount of species possible. So, with that being said, let's get right in. So, the equipment basics. There's a couple things that you have to think about when it comes to fishing. So, in the very beginning, fishing involved spears, it involved nets, traps. Hook and line angling didn't actually come around until significantly later. I don't have the exact date in my head. I think it was like the late 18th century, something like that. Where actually hook, line, and sinker type deal was even a thing to be started with. But nowadays, because so many technological advances have happened, and because materials are so readily available, companies have been able to go through the roof and try new things and create new things. And this is everything from the hook itself to the fishing lures to the rods to the line. I mean, literally every single aspect, equipment-wise, for the sport has had a ton of advancements and improvements. I mean, there's some things that were made forever ago that are still getting used today. There's definitely some people who prefer to use the older equipment still, and it's still available. But a lot of the newer stuff is an improvement over most of it. And it's just another thing that a newer person can get confused with, all that good stuff. So if you are here and you're in this chat and you're listening to this morning, I would love to know, if you do use artificial lures, what is your favorite artificial lure? If you have experimented with different kinds of fishing line, I would love to hear what your favorite fishing line is. If you could put that in the comments, that would be fantastic. And we're going to take a break and do some more shout outs. Well, Bosch, Nate, thank you for coming in. Obviously, Sandy Toes, thanks for coming in. Fishing for Whiskers, thanks for listening in. Brandon, I believe, was in here also. Thanks to everybody for swinging in. I greatly appreciate it. So then, the next thing to keep in mind is that, like I said, in the beginning, it was traps and spears. Hooks eventually came along. And originally they were made out of bone or iron, but they didn't really happen until later on, the iron ones. And even then, that's came so far. I'll go a little more on that in a little bit, but it's gone a huge distance. I mean, it literally was absolute basic stuff. I mean, people were, there's even fish hooks that archaeologists have found that are made out of human bone too. So I mean, it just goes to show that, they literally, back in the day, you didn't waste anything. You couldn't afford it. You couldn't waste anything at all. And again, I'll get into more a little more, but the basics are going to remain the same no matter what. No matter what the changes were. If you're going to actually get into the beginning, if you're going to get into the sport, at the very beginning of it, there's going to be 4 things you need: hook, line, rod, and a bait. And you don't even technically need the rod, because you can technically just use, you can hand line it if you wanted to. I don't recommend it, especially if you're catching any bigger fish, but it's not necessary. It's just definitely helpful, and I would recommend it, but it is not necessary. But so at the very minimum, you need the 3, which is hook, line, and bait. But I would recommend the 4th being the rod. So obviously that part of the confusion also when it comes to fishing gear is not just the hook, the line, the rod, and the bait. You have all these external, not needed, but highly desired things such as fish finders and boats and kayaks and inner tubes that you sit on and fish around, rod holders, bells, tackle boxes, all of that crazy stuff. And you don't have to have a lot of it. Is it helpful? Sure. Is it necessary? No. So like I said, bringing it back to the basics, what you need are the four: the rod, the hook, the line, the bait. Just in the United States, freshwater fishing accounted for $2.2 billion of industry net worth, which is absolutely insane. And if you look at the breakdown of what that stuff's spent on, the majority of it's spent on rods and reels and poles. You know, I mean, you're looking at an crazy large market, which is extremely inflated because of people such as myself, tournament anglers. You know, we have some of us. I would be lying if I said I only have one fishing rod. That's not true. I have probably over 20 or 25 fishing rods total, and some of them are specialized. Some of them are just ones I never got rid of because I wore them out. There's a few I've never even actually used. It's you can go as crazy and as heavy into this sport as you want with money, but I promise you can go just as cheap as you want also. And at the end, I will completely show you how. It does not have to be expensive. It can be, like I said, it can be as cheap or as it can be as cheap or as expensive as you want it to be. So again, back to the basics: hook, line, rod, bait. And just going by that, I promise you can keep it cheap. It does not have to be complicated. It can be broken down very simply into those four categories. And by doing those four categories, you can get started fishing. The hooks. So, like I said, hooks originally back in the day were made out of bone. They were made out of shell. They were made out of there were some ones that were made out of wood, some made out of teeth, which again I guess that would be classified as a bone. Later on, they got moved into the metal category, and most of them that you look at nowadays are going to be made out of stainless steel, carbon steel. But a lot of them even have coatings now. You have ones that are chemically sharpened. You have ones that are coated in Teflon. I mean, part of it depends on where you're fishing. Obviously, the freshwater one, you don't really need the stainless because your hook's not going to be used enough to worry about the rust, because let's just be honest here, you're likely to get caught in a snag, you're likely to get stuck in a fish, likely just to cast it off when you're first figuring out how to cast. I mean, things do happen, but your hooks, you don't have to go crazy with your hooks in freshwater. And saltwater, you definitely need the stainless because the salt will almost instantly rust your hook, and obviously you want the hook to stay sharp, and a rusty hook is not sharp. But then there's the different style of hooks. You have circle hooks, you have J hooks, Aberdeens, O'Shaughnessy, shiner hooks, bait holder hooks. I mean, you can go through the roof with the different types and different kinds. But for somebody who's just getting started, I recommend the Eagle Claw bait holder hooks above all else. Because especially if you're using worms or any kind of live bait, they have a couple of extra barbs on the shank of the hook, which is the long part. And that'll hook your bait on. Speaking of which, let me go and explain the hook a little more. So your hook is going to have, the top is going to have a little hole like this. So you have an eye of the hook, you have the shank, you have the bend, and then you have the barb, which is the point on the end. Those are the four parts of a hook. And the way that hook is shaped is usually what the name of it comes from. Obviously, if it looks like a J, it's a J hook. If it looks more like a circle, it's a circle hook. Kale hooks kind of look like a check mark. I mean, there's different applications for those hooks, the way those were designed. But for most people are going to be able to use just a J hook or a circle hook to be perfectly fine. There's no sense in confusing yourself about it. No sense in getting worked up over it. It really can be broken down to that simple. Excuse me, guys. Sorry about that. As for line, originally when fishing line was first made, it was made out of plant fibers, with kind of woven like rope. And actually, if you really break it down to how it was made, it's very similar to what braid is now today, because it was multiple fibers weaved in together. And then they moved on to these stronger lines that were made out of Dacron, and those were really, really, really stiff fishing lines, and they didn't really have a lot of stretch, and they were you could they stuck out like a sore thumb. Everybody knew what you were using if you were using the Dacron. Then later on, monofilament came along, which is made out of plastic, and then braid never really disappeared, but it became more popular more recently. And what it is a bunch of smaller monofilament lines braided together. And actually, if you look, generally speaking, from cheapest to expensive on braid, however many strands there are is what determines the price. And another thing to consider if you're using braided line, if you have 4 strands versus 8 strands versus, I think the highest I've seen is a 10 strand. The 4 strand almost looks square, and so it can cause issues with drag through the eyes on the rod. It can affect your casting. But the higher the strands, the smoother the casting, because it's smoother through the guides because it's more round, right? But then also, you have mono braid, Dacron, and fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon is the other one. Fluorocarbon, it's made out of another type of plastic, and when it goes underwater and reflected by the sun, it actually is see-through. It goes invisible. And there's obviously benefits and cons to each line, right? So obviously, fluorocarbon is the hardest for fish to see, so we like that. It has not a lot of stretch, which is not good in terms of abrasion resistance, or we're fighting bigger fish with smaller line. Braid has the least amount of stretch because it's already stretched out when you strain it all together. It's already all stretched out, so you don't have any kind of stretch with it. Monofilament has the most stretch, which is probably a lot of people that's a con, because especially if you're fishing from like a kayak or something, because when you're trying to fight the fish or set the hook, that line is stretching, and on top of that, your kayak's getting pulled towards the fish, and the fish is getting pulled towards you, which causes even more slack. So you see a lot of anglers will do like braid with a leader, which is what I do personally. But it's just all different kinds of applications. Nothing that you have to worry about. I would say if you're just starting out, if you go with any of the combos I recommend at the end, you're going to be using monofilament to start with. It is the most beginner friendly, because you don't have to worry about as much about using your drag until you learn how to use it, which is on the reel. We'll go over that in a minute. You don't have to have that many concerns about it breaking on rocks instantly with the abrasion, because it has more abrasion resistance because of the stretch. It's cheaper, which again, trying to get into the sport for cheap as possible for somebody who's new. Don't want to break the bank till you figure it out. So that's going to be my recommendation. Morning, KP. Welcome in, bud. Then you got bait. All right. I suggest for newer anglers just to start off with worms. Pretty much everything that swims will eat a worm. They're readily available. You can find them in your yard. They don't cost a lot. I think it's $4 for a pack, and they're going to have, depending on where you're at, obviously. It's here in Tennessee, where I'm at in Chattanooga, it's $4 a pack for either 30 red worms or for 12 night crawlers. Night crawlers being bigger, red worms being a little more resistant to heat. So it's just a little bit of difference there, depending on what you want. Because obviously the bigger night crawlers might be more, they're going to put off more scent when you break them apart or if they get hit by a fish. The red worms are going to be tore off easier by bluegill, but because you can actually use a whole worm on the hook, it looks a little more natural. So it just kind of depends on what you want to do on that. But then you also have the artificial lure side of things. You have hard baits, soft baits, as in the soft plastics. You have spinners, which are just like a little metal blade that spins, and those are various combinations of wires and blades that make different things. jerk baits, crank baits, which are just like little fish imitations that are made out of hardwood or balsa wood or metal or plastic. Some have rattles, some don't. They usually have treble hooks. Whole nother story there. You can go literally the lure market. I think everybody would agree with me that the lure market is not. They're not trying to sell you stuff that'll catch fish. They're trying to sell stuff that catches your eye. So there's a lot more confusion there too, because there's purples, there's blues, there's greens, there's pinks, yellows, all that stuff. Some of that stuff looks more natural than others, obviously. And obviously, I would recommend, if you're going to go any kind of artificial lure, I would recommend you do something that looks more natural, more like a bait fish, or more like a bluegill, or more like a crayfish, or what have you. But you can't 100% rule out the fact that some fish will hit pretty colored things. There's people that catch bass on purple worms all the time. It's a phenomenon, I guess is the best way to say it, because it's not really ever been proven 100% by fact that it does work. But there's a very common thought amongst the fishing community that red seems to do really good in the spring. The color red, even though it doesn't make any sense, because there's not any bait fish out there that are bright red. But it does seem to catch fish a lot more in the spring for whatever reason. Like I said, phenomenon, facts, I don't know. But it is quite common now, similar to the barge bite. I mean, you hear these little rumors from people all the time about what works here, what works there, why this works, why that doesn't work. And it's just a matter of going out there and testing it yourself. In my experience, the red lures do work more in the spring. In my experience, the barge bite doesn't exist. But that doesn't mean that everybody's wrong, because people do swear by it, and there's people that can prove that it happens. So, I mean, it's just a matter of everybody's personal experience, and you have to get that on your own when you go. But back to what I was saying, bait. Sorry. So, I would recommend worms for anybody who's starting out. The second thing I'd recommend is minnows, or any kind of live bait, because most of them, especially if your state allows it or your area allows it, catching something that's from the area that you're fishing in, those fish have seen that. So it's way more realistic. You don't have to put a lot of work into it. You can literally just throw it out there, let it do its thing, and you're fishing. Some people call it the lazy way. Some people call it cheating. Depends how you look at it. Personally, I think for a beginner trying to figure things out, till you can learn how to use your drag, until you know how the fish fight and see things, which again comes with experience and from learning, going live bait is the only way for a beginner, in my opinion. So, again, natural baits, artificial baits, whole big spectrum. You can go as crazy as you want with it. But I recommend going live bait. Now the rod. Again, the rod is not a have to have. That you can literally get away with just the hook, the line, and the bait. I do recommend a rod. It allows you to cast your baits further. It allows you to have some play with the fish, which will help in terms of landing the fish, because of the power surges that some of the bigger fish will give you. But it also allows you to use a reel, which will give you some drag, which again is to help give you an advantage against the fish. Now, rods, they originally were all made out of fiberglass. Nowadays, more and more people are using graphite. And then just about every company has some sort of mix in between the two. S-Glass, to be one that I can remember off the top of my head. But the idea is that you have this rod blank, which is the bottom. It's just the original straight shell piece. You have the tube that's there. That's the blank. You have a handle attached to the end, which can be out of cork, could be out of plastic. I've seen some that were made out of metal. Then you have, if the rod you're using allows a reel, which most of them do, you're gonna have a reel seat, which that's usually made out of aluminum or steel. And then as you go up the rod, you're gonna have these little circles that your line goes through. Those are line guides, and those vary on materials too. You have some that have carbon rings. You have some that are just metal rings. You have some that are plastic. And they all have different properties in terms of how much they go through wear and tear versus different materials. Obviously, the metal ones and the ceramic ones are going to do better with braid than the plastic. But again, those usually cause the price of the rod to go up higher and faster. Again, if you're starting out and you use a monofilament, you don't even have to worry about what the line guides are made out of, because you're using monofilament. So just keep that in mind. If you want to stay on the cheaper end of things, I'd go plastic. If you're wanting to go to the higher end of things, for whether it be for looks, whether it be for the increased sensitivity, if you're using braid, then obviously you can consider the other stuff, but it's not necessary, especially as a beginner. And I didn't have a slide for reels, but we're going to go over reels a little bit. There's four different main kind of reels. You have bait casters, you have spinning reels or open face reels, you have spin casting reels, which are the push button ones, and then you have fly fishing reels. For the most part, those are the main four. There's a couple outliers, but for most people, those are the four that most people are going to mess with. As a beginner, I would recommend either an open face or a spin cast, which is, like I said, is the one with the push button. I think if you're wanting to get into the sport as cheap as possible and as effectively as possible, then I would recommend a spinning reel. It gives you the most options in terms of what you can use with it. It gives you the most options in terms of what kind of line to use, how much line to use, what size of line to use, because a lot of the other reels are, like the spin cast ones especially, are really limited on how much line you can put on the reel, so you really have to go with smaller diameters, smaller or lighter weights. Whereas the spinning reel and the baitcaster reel, typically they have bigger spools, or can be upgraded to bigger spools, so it allows you to use the bigger lines and more of it. So again, as a beginner, I'd recommend a spinning reel or open face reel, just because it has the most options. It also has the easiest drag to adjust. So if you're in the middle of fighting a fish, you can adjust it on the fly, which is nice, because the other ones have either a dial on the side that you have to like move horizontally, which is really annoying, or in the terms of the baitcaster, the reel itself has another little star gear you can adjust, but you can't do them both at the same time, otherwise it just spins. So being able to adjust that on the fly can help save you some fish too, especially if you're landing a bigger fish on smaller tackle. On average, you're looking at $52 to get into fishing. It sounds like a lot, but if you think about it, that's only like 4 Starbucks coffees. That's only like 3 trips to McDonald's or Taco Bell or something like that, where you're spending $15 a time. If you donate plasma in my area, that's 1 trip. I mean, it is affordable by definition. You can get into it. That's 2 movie tickets. Maybe 3, depending on what kind of movie theater you go to. It is a very affordable sport. Don't let anybody tell you that it's not. Yes, there are people that go out there and they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on equipment. You don't have to do that. In fact, the rod that I recommend at the end of this, I think is $30. The line is actually, it already has line on it, but if you wanted to replace the line, you're looking at another $6. And then hooks and sinkers and any of that other stuff that you think you might need, like I said, hooks for sure, you're looking at $1.20. So I think I could even get you in cheaper than $52. Money does not have to be an excuse to get you into fishing. It is a concern, as everything should be, right? But it is one of the cheapest hobbies to get into, and I'm going to prove it to you. Obviously, there's fishing luxuries. I'm not telling you to go buy a $20,000 boat. I'm not telling you to buy a $50,000 boat. Don't buy a $2,000 fish finder. That's the stuff that you don't need when you're learning. It's more important you learn watercraft. It's more important you learn how to tie knots. It's more important to learn about the fish you're catching. Do those things help? Sure, they can help. They're tools. They're not necessities. So keep that in mind. It is not something to be that scared about. It is not something that has to be that expensive. It is just a matter of getting out there and doing it. But back to the whole spending thing. The reason I say it can be as expensive as you want is because of stuff like this. $15 billion in tax revenue was generated by fishing activities. That included purchasing fishing lures. That was the rods, that was their lines, that was reels, boats, fish finders, all that good stuff. $15 billion, which is absolutely insane. What would you do with $15 million? Sorry, $15 billion. I would never work again. I would fish every day. But don't tell my wife. And 33 million Americans said they went fishing at least once in the past year. And because of all these money that's spending at $15 billion, 828,000 people were employed. It is nuts. $15 billion. 15 billion. And on average to get started, they spend 52 a year. Or 52 a year to get started for the year. $52. I don't know about you. I find that to be very affordable. And again, all those numbers are just the United States. So if you imagine the global economy of it, right? You have India, you have all of the Asian continent, you have all of Europe, you have Australia, which has a huge. I know Australia has a huge fishing following, and that's just for sport fishing. It's not even including people that are harvesting fish to eat, because a lot of countries that's their main source of food. I mean, that number probably goes absolutely astronomically high if you include the global market. And like, that's insane. $15 billion. So again, four basics you need: hook, line, bait, and rod. Rod not being 100% necessary, but recommended. If you're using a rod that has a reel seat, recommending a spinning reel. Now, before you worry about, oh, well, how do I know which reel to pick or which rod to pick? They come in combos. They do that for a reason. It's to help people get into the sport faster. Some are better than others. The one that I'm going to recommend the most, if you are going after any kind of fish that'll bite, you're not worried about how big it is, you're not worried about what it tastes like, any of that stuff. You're just going out there to fish, and you want to have the most fun overall, no matter what you catch. I'm going to recommend the Shakespeare Conquest combos that Walmart carries. They're black and yellow. They have a spinning reel. They have monofilament line on them already. I'm going to recommend the 6'6" medium light one. The smaller one is great for smaller fish, and it can handle decent sized bass. It gets a little worrisome when you start getting into some bigger catfish, because it's a light action. It doesn't have a lot of backbone to it. The medium light is going to give you the backbone to go after bigger bass, some decent sized catfish, and pretty much but it's light enough that anything smaller than that is still going to be a good fight. It's still going to be a good time. And it's still going to allow you to cast smaller baits, which is great. And that rod is rated for 4 pounds to 10 pound line. So 10 pounds plenty for anybody who's going after anything that's like 25 pounds and less. And that sounds nuts. Why would you want 10 pound line for a 25 pound fish? That's what the drag's for. That's what the rod's for. What learning how to play the fish is about. You can land big fish on small tackle. People do it all the time. In fact, 2 years ago, there was a guy down here that caught 102 pound blue cat on 12 pound line. Took him 3 hours to do it, but it's doable. So don't think you have to have the biggest, meanest, heaviest, scariest looking thing out there. It's not necessary. So I would recommend the, like I said, the medium light 6'6" Shakespeare Conquest combo. I'm pretty sure it's $30. If you're just going after all species. If you're going after something specific, every species I can recommend something specific. But if, let's say, you're just going after big fish, big catfish, big stripers, all that good stuff, then I'm going to recommend a Ugly Stick GX2 in either a medium heavy or a heavy. Probably medium heavy, because you're still going to want to be able to feel smaller fish bite, but you're going to want more backbone. And in that case, I would recommend just about any of the cheaper spinning reels at Walmart or do. But I really like the Zebcos that are silver. They're silver and red. I don't remember the model. I think they're like $26. And the rod itself, you're looking at probably about $40. That's a little more expensive, but that's going to handle your bigger fish. And the bigger fish are going to make more of an impact on your rods, how hard to hit, how much drag they need to get brought in, how much backbone. I mean, if you're especially fishing in current, stuff like that too. Again, all these little nuances that change things, but I would recommend one of those two setups, either a Ugly Stick GX2 with one of the Zebco. I can't remember like I said, I can't remember the model, but it's silver and red. It's like $26 at Walmart. They come in a couple of different sizes. You can get as big or as small as you want. If you're going to be fishing either current, long distance casting, or going after extremely big fish, I would recommend the bigger reel, because it holds more. Obviously, it costs a little bit more. But then your hooks. Again, I'm going to recommend either J hooks or circle hooks. The circle hooks, if you're worried about setting the hook and you'd rather just reel down on the fish, then I would recommend the circle hooks. You're gonna miss some fish. It's just part of the way it works. But by doing that, you don't have to worry about yanking the bait out of their mouth. You don't have to worry about yanking the fish out of the water. And they come small enough. I mean, they make circle hooks for trout and panfish and stuff too. They're this big versus the catfish hook is that big, right? But I would recommend either the J hooks or circle hooks. Just about every brand of circle hook does well. Again, if you're just at Walmart, Eagle Claw sells what they call it a Circle C. It looks like a stainless steel. They work just fine. They're plenty sharp. Some of the Walmarts I carry Team Catfish ones as well. I've used both of them. I prefer the Eagle Claws in terms of sharpness, but the Team Catfish ones do have the bigger gauge wire. So if you're going after really large fish or consistently catching large fish, or if you're having issues with the hook bending out straight or getting bent while you're taking out of the fish kind of thing, you might want the bigger gauge wire. As for J hooks, like I said, there's tons of options on those too. My favorite are the Eagle Claws bait holders, just because they have the little barbs on it to help keep your live bait on there better because they don't slide off as easy. Because a live bait will work itself off a hook eventually if it's sitting there long enough and not getting hit. So having that little extra time can be the difference between you catching a fish or not catching a fish. As for lines, again, I recommend monofilament for somebody starting out. If you're gonna go for the bigger fish, I do recommend spending a little extra on the line. Going with the Trilene Big Game is my favorite. I know it has good bridge resistance. I know it has good stretch. But it's not so crazy on diameter that you have to worry about running out of space on your reel. And then if you do decide to go the braid route, I would recommend doing something at least 8 strands. Because your 4 strands are going to wear out your rod guides a lot faster. But one caution I would give you if you are using braid is that if you do get snagged, do not grab the line with your hands. It will cut into you. Because of those tiny fibers, it has like a grit to it, and it will cut you. And as for bait, like I said, I recommend worms. Worms and minnows or crayfish, stuff that you can catch in your area. You can find various videos on YouTube on how to catch those things with traps. Worms, obviously, you just go turn over a rock or a leaf, or in my case, a dog's water bowl, because it's the wettest thing in the yard. You flip it over, there's always like 10 or 12 sitting under their water bowl. And there's different kind of worms too, like, right? So you got night crawlers, you got red worms, you have things called, down here in the south, you have things called fiddler worms, which are absolutely insane. They get long, they get like 2 feet long. It's absolutely crazy. But you do what's called fiddling for those, which is where you just vibrate the ground in an area. Most people would take a stick and rub some, cut out some notches in it, and then take another stick and rub the grooves. And it vibrates the dirt, and you'll start seeing the worms come out of the ground. It's pretty crazy. And then obviously from the saltwater aspect, yeah, you got sandworms. You have a couple other worms. I don't really know the names of them. I've seen. They're pretty wild looking. But then you also, live bait wise, you have leeches. You have basically every kind of bait fish in the world, or even game fish. Some states let you use game fish for bait. So it's just a matter of finding what your target species wants. Or in terms of just going out there and go fishing, just getting something that everything will eat, such as worms or tiny minnows. And that's my recommendations. So, I hope this presentation helps you get a grasp on equipment. I hope that you realize that it's more affordable than you think. I hope you don't feel like you have to break the bank to make it happen. And I hope you get out there and go fishing soon. And, again, this is Anthony with the Yakety Yak Fishing Podcast. And I thank you guys for tuning in. Before we go, though, on the live show, has anybody got any questions? Or recommendations? With that being said, if at any point anybody has any questions and they want to get a hold of me, whether it be about fishing related stuff or YouTube related stuff. You can always email me at yakshoreoutdoors.com. I'm sorry, yakshoreoutdoors@yahoo.com. Yeah, it's gonna be another one of the episodes coming up. Is like the beginner techniques, but you got to have the gear in the first place to actually start trying to learn those things. So that was the reason I did it in that order. But it is. I mean, tying a knot is crazy important because it is literally the direct connection between you and the fish. Ugly truth be told, I do not maintain my gear anywhere near as well as I should. But yes, that definitely could be a topic, and I probably should do that too. For sure. Morning, Mr. Tully. You caught the tail end of it. We're in the Q&A at this point. But I'm glad you came by. Just went over the basics. Talk about hooks, lines, rods, and bait, and how the only three that are absolutely necessary is the line, the hook, and the bait. Gave a couple recommendations, being the Shakespeare Conquest combo they carry at Walmart. It's an affordable option for people that are new getting into the sport. And then I gave one option that costs a little more for people that are targeting only big fish. Excuse me. But then bait wise, talk about how worms and minnows get the job done for most people. But then obviously, if you want to go the artificial lure route, there's a whole nother world to get into with that. And it's way complicated and not necessary for beginners to get involved with. Went over some of the global economy some of the U.S. based fishing economy statistics. 15 billion being spent a year by anglers, and 1 in 5 buying licenses for the year, but they're spending about $52 to get the year started for them when it comes to gear. Yeah, went over a brief history on some of the stuff about how the old rods were almost all fiberglass and how a lot of them now are more graphite based, or there's some combination of the two. And that almost every brand has their own. And then you have reels. Went over the four main kinds: spinning, spin casting, bait casting, and fly fishing reels. How those are the main four, with obviously there's a couple outliers. How you don't have to have a reel, but that is helpful because of the drag systems, and how the rod's important for the same reason. It gives you a little bit of play in terms of fighting the fish. It gives you the advantage for getting landed. Went over the types of lines, the three main being braid, mono, and fluorocarbon. Kind of a couple of the pros and cons for each, and how I recommend that monofilament's the way the beginners go. And yeah, talked about some of the history of fishing itself, how hook, rod, and reel line fishing was not something that was always there, how it developed over time and didn't really become popular till the end of the 18th and beginning of the 19th century. How before it was almost all nets and spears. All that good stuff. No, actually, people do catch catfish on lures. One of the most popular lures to catch catfish on is actually a crankbait. There's people that specifically go out there and use crankbaits for them, especially when they're in shallower water. Because the issue with crankbaits, they can only dive so far, right? So, but because catfish tend to be more towards the bottom, especially when they're in shallower water. When you're beating up the rocks in the bottom with these rattling pieces of wood or metal with treble hooks on it, yeah, it looks like a bait fish or a crayfish running, and they're after the bait fish and crayfish. So yeah, it's quite common. I've personally caught them on crappie jigs. I've caught them on spinner baits. I have a buddy of mine who caught them on the little inline blue fox spinners like you use for trout. He actually caught, his was almost 30 pounds. He caught it on, it was this big. The spinner was this big, and he caught a 30-pound fish. People catch them with soft plastics too. When you're like Texas rigging, stuff like that, where usually they're like the slower presentations. Not always. Obviously, crankbaits can be cranked pretty fast. Sorry, excuse me, guys. But yeah, it's quite quite popular in some spots by some people to catch catfish on artificials. And almost basically, if you look at it this way, if something will hit a live minnow, you could probably catch it on a lure, because almost all lures are represent some sort of live moving creature, and if they'll eat that creature in the first place, you have the potential to catch them on that. I would say it's probably different for something that's a little, if you have a, no, I can't say that either, because if you have a fish that can't see at all, say their eyes are completely gone, they're still going to feel the lateral line. So any vibrations from the lures, they're going to feel. Any sound, rattles, bumping of rocks, all that stuff, they're going to hear all that too. The only thing artificials don't do a good job at, and they're getting better with it because they're coming out with stuff all the time, but is scent. A lot of it's like your hard bait stuff like that. You can't really add scent to it unless you buy these specially made gels and stuff, and then those, some work really well in my experience, some don't work at all. And there's been studies about that. Maybe that could be another episode too. There's been studies about how those scents work and whether or not they actually are legit, to help artificial lures do better than they do. But you get scents that could be garlic. You get garlic scented stuff, coffee scented stuff, crayfish scented stuff, anise oil, shad scented. Then you have the really, really stinky stuff. Like there's stink baits made for catfish specifically. It's made out of cheese. It's made out of blood. I mean, there's different things out there. I think out of all of the like injected type scents that are like built into the plastics or certain lures, coffee and garlic seem to be the ones that are used the most. And then I also know that like a lot of the soft plastic makers will put salt in their stuff for the same reason. Actually, one of the last bass I caught, the biggest bass of the trip, actually was caught on a coffee scented worm. But it's definitely a thing. And of course, now a lot of companies make these little eggs or orbs or beads that are made. They're like a gel coating. I'm sorry, they're gel on the inside, but they're coated with a little bit of like a dissolvable plastic. And when you put them, you can put them on like treble hooks and stuff, and they'll dissolve in the water while you're fishing with them too. That gives scent too. But those are really popular among crappie anglers and white bass anglers, stuff like that too. Sandy, it's just a strong scent. It's just something that gets their attention. Because I mean, think about it. If you're fishing at night, if a predatory fish, is looking at the bait, right, then they can see it. If you cut out the light and they can't see the bait, then all they have going for them is vibration with the lateral line, scent, or taste. Basically, the scent and taste are the same category, right? Especially as the fish swims in the water and you're putting stuff in the water, right? And they have to breathe through their mouth. So I mean, you have those scents are literally just there to catch a fish as they're going by, or that you're going by the fish. It's not necessarily proven that, oh, hey, bass will eat coffee, so just give them a cup of coffee. No, that's not necessarily how that works. But being able to give yourself that edge by giving you something that they can find has been proven to make a difference in terms of catch rate. And like I said, in my experience, the best ones I've seen, or best ones I've experienced, actually been garlic. Flat out. I think Spike It's the brand that I use is my favorite. It's actually like a chartreuse dye, but you can use anything. You put it on live bait. You can put it on lures, which is what I usually use it for, and it just gives it a little bit of color, but then also has that garlic scent, and it's very, very strong, very potent. And as for like the stink baits for catfish made out of blood and cheese, I've used those too. They are gross. They are not for somebody who has a weak stomach. Right. There's been some studies, like I said, there's been some studies about scents, and I could really go into that. It's a whole other ball game. But there are more popular scents because there's been studies that prove that certain ones seem to catch more attention than the others. And so obviously if you're wanting the edge, then that's what you use. But yeah, coffee is a really easy scent to put into something because it is strong. It doesn't take a lot of essence, I guess is what I call it, to make it as strong as it is. Same with garlic. It doesn't take a lot to make something smell like garlic. So that goes to the whole cost efficiency thing too when it comes to bait maker stuff. But like in the carp world, anything you can think of gets used in the carp world. Carp, garlic, onion, blood, crawfish, mussels, and then basically every kind of fruit in existence. There's some scent out there made for carp fishing. It's peaches, oranges, lemons, bananas, white chocolate, cinnamon. I've actually made some baits for carp out of 5-spice, which it really strong smelling stuff. And then obviously you have the scents that don't have a lot of scent but have a lot of taste, right? Like your cayenne pepper it smells a little bit like pepper, but it tastes hot, right? So the whole scent and taste thing, it's a whole other world, and you can go absolutely nuts with it. Molasses, sugar, corn. Literally, I've seen people do it. I've seen people actually like take fruit, add flour, like mash it all up, add flour to it, and just use the mushed up fruit into a dough, and then use that for carp too. I mean, it's just a matter of complete preference and complete whatever you could think of, because if it's a strong smell to us, it's likely a strong smell to fish. But you can go absolutely insane with it. Okay, I can do that. But yeah, there's a lot of options out there, and this is exactly here's my point. If somebody that's new into the sport comes in, and they see these hundreds of thousands of options, and they see these hundreds of thousands of colors, types, styles, it's very easy to get confused. And that's the whole point of this series, is to bring it back to the basics for those who've been out of touch, and to get people that are new into the sport to not be confused, so that way they can have a good time and get into it. With that being said, I do have to get this started to close up. So if you're interested in getting a hold of me, like I said, you can email me at yakshoreoutdoors@yahoo.com with any questions or concerns, podcast ideas, anything like that. If you have any questions, you can email me there. If you have any concerns about the show, if you would like to help with the show, anything like that, you can also email me at yakshoreoutdoors@yahoo.com. And like I said, I hope this helped somebody out there get into fishing. I hope this helps somebody realize it's not as hard or as complicated as it looks, and you can get in a lot cheaper than what people say. You don't have to be concerned about it. Just bring it back to the basics. Get out there and get to fishing. My name is Anthony. You're watching the Yakety Yak Fishing Podcast. The series called Anyone Can Fish. Today we went over equipment basics. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Thanks, and have a good day.